in my research, I got to a point of having a big epiphany. And the epiphany was there really isn't anything for me to lose at this point. And so, without telling anyone, 2 days later, I jumped on a flight to Costa Rica where I sat with ayahuasca for 4 nights, and it saved my life.
Psychedelics are said to shift our fixed perspectives, giving us a bird's eye view of our own lives and helping to remove the lenses of cultural, religious, and social conditioning through which we are taught to see the world. They are being used therapeutically and somatically to treat depression, addiction, PTSD, and trauma, and many are using them to explore the ineffable, those unknown realms of consciousness and beyond. Join us in Adventures of the Psyche as we learn how psychedelics have transformed people's lives. Welcome, friends, to Adventures of the Psyche. Today we are joined by Jemie Sae Koo, who shares how ayahuasca helped her treat severe anxiety and illness and gave her her life's purpose. Jemie Sae Koo is an entrepreneur with a 15-year history in digital and marketing for major global brands, and her focus is on designing projects rooted in corporate social responsibility. She is currently the CEO and co-founder of Psychable, an online community connecting those who would like to explore the healing powers of psychedelics with a network of practitioners and psychedelic-based treatments, including integration, therapy, events, and retreats.
A little bit about my background. My father was abusive and an alcoholic, and that set me on the path of dealing with depression as a lifelong issue. Even as a kid, I was put on various forms of SSRIs and antidepressants, and it didn't help me. It made it even worse. And even as a kid, I remember putting the pill under my tongue and showing my mother that my mouth was empty, that I took the pill. And I would run upstairs and then end up spitting out the pill because I just knew it wasn't right for me. When I was 9 years old, my father was taken away by the police, and I was the eldest. I had to step in and raise my two younger brothers while my mother was working 4 to 5 jobs just to make ends meet. So I never really had a childhood growing up. But what it did for me was it thrusted me into adulthood with a lot of overachiever type A tendencies, always wanting to be the best that I could be and do. And so I ended up finding myself oftentimes as one of the only women executives in a variety of leadership roles in very male dominated industries. And fast forward to around 5 years ago, I was an executive at a management consulting firm where I was the only female, the youngest, the only minority on the executive leadership team. And after 2 years of day in and day out of that, I ended up getting really, really sick. I had globs of my hair fall out. I was waking up in the middle of the night in puddles of sweat. I would work out and I barely break into sweat. I had developed brain fog where I couldn't even formulate a sentence, let alone remember the next word I was going to say. And when these symptoms arose for me, I ended up plummeting into the depths of depression to where I lost all sense of purpose to life. And I quite frankly didn't see the reason to continue living. And this was also at a point where I had spent tens of thousands of dollars seeing Western medical doctors who said I had checked out normal, and I just knew something was seriously wrong. And so I was exhausting all the options out there. I was taking different forms of medication. I was changing my diet, my lifestyle. At the peak, I had 40 different bottles of supplements on my kitchen counter. And it was just absolutely unsustainable. And so I was running out of hope because nothing worked. And I found myself in the depths of despair and really at the bottom of the barrel. And I was so ashamed and I was so embarrassed. I didn't tell anyone. My own family didn't even know. what was happening. And then in the middle of this darkness, I got a phone call from my younger brother. And he's a successful entrepreneur, sold his business at 26 years old. He ended up selling all of his worldly possessions and was just traveling the world. And along in his journey, he found ayahuasca, and he had just had his first ayahuasca experience. And that's when he called me. And he opened the conversation by asking that I keep an open mind, because up until that point, I was always a very straight-laced person. I never did any drugs. I didn't even know what drugs look like. I've never even been drunk in my life, even to this day. And so he proceeded to share with me his experience with ayahuasca and how transformative it was. And I was really confused. I never really heard this thing called ayahuasca. And I started recalling this episode I saw on National Geographic featuring war veterans with PTSD that went into the jungles of the Amazon. And I asked him if that's what he was referencing. And he said, yes. And I remember responding to him like, that's so extreme. And that sounds so crazy and so out there. And I just remember feeling really scared. And I just told him like, thank you, but no, thank you. But little did I know, he planted a seed in my head. Because in that same week, I ended up getting a call from a girlfriend of mine who I knew through random social circles. And when she called me, she invited me to dinner. And when she invited me, I felt really called to show up to dinner. But she didn't even know what state I was in, because the state I was in was I could barely even will myself out of bed, let alone pick up a toothbrush. I somehow made it to dinner that night, and she did a lot of the talking. And she shared with me that early in the year, she was going through some really big challenges in her life. And she ended up going to a retreat in Costa Rica where it was a 5-star resort with farm to table, private chef, with yoga and breath work. And they happened to be serving this thing called ayahuasca. And she also shared with me that it was a resort that had doctors and nurses on site for 24/7. And I remember perking up and paying attention, because that really appealed to my type A side and really needing a sense of safety. And so when I left dinner that night, I was in prayer meditation, and I was really asking, why was this thing called ayahuasca coming into my field twice in a week? And it was this curiosity that led me to jump down the rabbit hole and researching everything I could about psychedelics and ayahuasca. And in my research, I got to a point of having a big epiphany. And the epiphany was, there really isn't anything for me to lose at this point. And so without telling anyone, 2 days later, I jumped on a flight to Costa Rica, where I sat with ayahuasca for 4 nights, and it saved my life. And not only did it save my life, it gave me a renewed sense of purpose, that in everything that I do is to be in service to the highest. And since doing it for the first time 5 years ago, I haven't been depressed since. And so because of this medicine, I'm here. I'm alive. I'm standing here before you. And I was resolved up until that point, thinking to myself that depression was going to be my norm. And within the 4 days of sitting with the medicine, I wasn't depressed anymore. And so this is why I have devoted myself to this space and to this work. And it is not for the faint of heart. There's a lot of shadows that we all have to do for ourselves as well, and to continue to be in service. And so I come to this work embodying love, embodying harmony, embodying humility, and reminding myself that the second I think I know something is the second I know nothing.
Thank you so much, Jemie, for sharing. So I'm curious. Ayahuasca has this reputation for bringing online information that we previously just had no idea was happening. What our old tendencies were, what these old patterns were that we just couldn't see clearly before. What what did you learn?
It definitely brought me to the awareness of this constant need for control. That somehow I can control everything, and I can control my outcomes, and I can just control every single step of the way. And ooh, it has been a practice of bring increased awareness around that sort of tendency, and really practicing full surrender, fully surrendering to the universe. Um, Even when I can't figure something out or something doesn't feel clear, it's just like, okay, let me fully surrender into this moment and allow and let go.
How has that shifted things in your day-to-day life?
I used to have a lot of anxiety. I was riddled with anxiety. I didn't even realize it. I was in a constant state of anxiety. I was constantly draining my adrenals. I was on this sort of adrenaline, and really putting my body on overdrive, which is another thing that led me to getting sick and having depression. Just really wearing my body out. And so a lot of it has been really attuning to my body, not disassociating myself away from feeling the feelings that are coming up, really honoring all the parts, even the parts that I was ashamed of or didn't want it to come to surface or to light, but really honoring that and naming it and talking about it, giving it space and time, and being able to process what exactly is happening and how I'm feeling, and really being attuned to the message that my body is giving me.
You mentioned that these experiences and working with ayahuasca have helped put you onto your life's path so that you can live your purpose. And I'm curious to hear what that looks like.
Yeah, I think before I answer that, I want to say that because of everything that I have experienced in life, and all the pains and the traumas and the struggles, it put me into such a state of introspection coming out of my first ayahuasca experience. And that introspection led me to, how can I help people breathe a little easier? How can I help people suffer a little less unnecessarily? And so that introspection led me to creating the idea of what Psychable is today, which is known as the Yelp of psychedelics. And it really is a place where you can tap into a directory of practitioners who are practicing different modalities around healing, and find practitioners who are more experienced and have lived experience with psychedelic medicines. Now, everything on the site is legal, but you can't procure any illegal substances.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your story, Jemie.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm deeply honored.